Good afternoon, everyone. It's the second to last session, so I'm really glad that you've hung in after the lunch slump and coming to hear my discussion on auctions and data. I am not a data professional, so I've heard a couple of talks throughout the last couple days where they're like, I'm a fish out of water, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of me too. So I'm an event professional that is in love with data. So one really important thing is data is what allows me to do my job well. And if there are any other event professionals here, then you know what I mean. And then the data professionals, we sometimes rely upon them to provide us with that information. For small nonprofits, sometimes you are the event professional and the data professional. So, and I'm used to being in that situation. But let me start this discussion and we will be on our way. So, data in your auction, the data you need and how to use it. Auctions, the important thing about auctions is that they are a huge community builder. That is one of the things, events in general and especially auctions, and we'll go through what that looks like for different donors that you are connecting with. The important thing about data in your events is that in the field, I have to trust that my data is accurate. And if my data is not accurate, then I lose the trust of my donors. So that's one of the big reasons why data, the auction has come into this discussion in this small nonprofit programming that they are trying to enhance with the conference. What I'd like to do is start with introductions, and it looks like we got a small group, so I'll be able to get to know you maybe a little bit more. But who am I? My name is Bree. In print, I'm Brianne, but please call me Bree. I am I've been doing auctions for about 8 years. I am currently on staff at Seattle University where they don't have a lot of auctions right now, but we are starting a big, we have a gala, which is kind of a soft ask in fall. The athletics department is starting on a new auction that's going to be in May, and then we have a couple other small ones. But my last position, I was at the JDRF Seattle Guild Gala, which I don't know, is anyone here, who's here from Seattle? And then we have a couple others, and where are you from?
We're from Olympia.
Olympia, okay, so the region, and you? Utah. Seattle in auction has a really unique relationship with auctions because we have the highest amount per capita. If I talk to people who have not been to an auction, I wonder, either you're a transplant or I wonder what other ways they're being involved because everyone I talk to has been in auction. So who here is on staff? Has anyone here been to an auction? Has everyone here been there? And who is on staff for an auction? And volunteer? Any volunteer for an auction? So auctions and that volunteer, the thing that I've been hearing so much about is that volunteer engagement because we see that volunteer engagement is one of the highest predictors for major gifts. So an auction is a way for your volunteers to start in at the ground level, and I've made my own version of the donor pyramid as it relates to an auction. So we'll see that towards the end of the presentation. So why auctions? It's community building, supporter engagement, no matter what capacity. As I mentioned, people can be volunteers. You have donors for auction items, and you have sponsorships, people that just buy tickets. Sorry, I forgot I had animations here. So no matter what capacity, like I said, giving, volunteer, I've in bold because that is really key to developing your event for years to come. And most important, it is fun. So if guests arrive at an auction and they have a great time, they are going to come, they're ready to sign up to participate in the next one. And if they're just a ticket if they just buy a ticket, they get their brain going about how they can be involved more in the future. So the overview for today, just so you know, we're going to go through some auction math, which is we'll talk a little bit about sponsorships. I'm focusing a lot on live and silent auction revenue. And because in the event world with auctions are so complex, we could stand here and talk about auctions all day. So I'm going to try to really focus on the data. We're going to highlight what you should be tracking. and what that means for sustaining your event, and then using it for donor cultivation. And then we'll save at the Q&A, we can talk about a lot of people that want to know about procurement and strategies and just auction production in general. So if you'd like to save that for the end, then we can talk about the less data-focused things on auctions. So auction math is really important. People are always asking me how you determine how to be successful for your auctions. And we're going to focus on the data you need. That's the first thing is revenue. Of course, you want to know how much you made, and you really want to track your expenses, so you want to keep your gross and net. That's the very key thing. A lot of people I talk to sometimes only are keeping track of that, so we'll get more into the other things that you can track on. It's really important that you are keeping them or getting information for at least 3 to 5 years. For people that are just starting an auction, you really need to know that you have to commit to at least 3 years before you can start getting your full stride and how well you're going to do. Because people they're interested. It's easy to get someone to come to an event, but to understand what it is to be involved in your auction, that can take some time. Sponsorships, and focusing again on the breakdown and analysis. You want to make sure you're keeping your different levels, how many you're getting, and also looking at movement between the years. Is someone jumping from a $1,000 sponsorship, which is pretty low, I'm just gonna use that as an example, and did they jump to 5,000? So when you start looking at where they're moving from, you can start to get at the why, because that's what, as event professionals and development professionals, you really want to know the why and to get to know your donors a little bit more. Live auction, of course, you want to keep that. That is going to be the #1 revenue generator, and we'll talk about percentages and what live auctions will bring to your event. Also breaking it down to, you'll want to report at the end. Actually, each single live auction item, you want to know what the value was. We'll talk a lot about value. What it sold for, and looking at the percentage. And again, we'll talk about what is average for percentage for live auction and silent auction. The other thing is separating out by auction type. And we'll talk about having a nice balance between your items, because you don't want to have, art is it's nice to have a couple of pieces of art, but art is hard to sell. You are relying upon one particular person to have that taste. So you want to make sure you're looking at what types of auctions are selling, or items are selling well at your auction. Donations and paddle raises is another thing. The paddle raise, or fund a need, fund a cure is what we called it at JDRF. That is the part of your event that is 100% tax deductible. It is a straight donation. You start high and you work your way low. Anyone can participate. It's very visible. And so you want to make sure you're breaking down every single level and looking at the numbers and movement between them. Raffles and other sales is definitely another breakdown point. Raffle tickets and merchandise. Maybe, like I mentioned, we're doing a red tie celebration, so we're going to be selling red ties as part of it. And that's not necessarily something we're looking for as a fundraiser, but it's something we're going to hope to sell multiple years. It's going to be a commemorative thing. And so those other sales are fun and engaging for your guests. But again, live and silent auction is what you should be focusing on for your revenue. And pre-event versus post-event revenue is definitely important, because by looking at that, you can see what donors are giving before the event. The insight that you can get from that is they're the kind of people that are going to give without the social pressure, because auctions are a unique combination of peer pressure, visual donations, community engagement. You have the spectrum of people that are going to give to you anyways. If you can look at the guests that are giving pre-event, you might have an insight on who could be a matching donor. So when you go to donation or raise the paddle strategies, and you want to do $100, a matching gift for everyone that gives at the $100 level, that just might be some insight to knowing your constituency a little bit more. So, auction math, we are focusing on setting auction goals. Event expenses, you really need to be aware of what it takes to put on your event. And some key event expenses. Site rental is the biggest one, catering, decor expense, entertainment. Some of the auctions that really grow in size and have large sponsorship levels, they focus on entertainment. When I talk to my colleagues about how much entertainment actually brings value to an auction, it's about 50-50. When you're at your sponsorship levels are at $50,000 or more, the people who are purchasing at that level, they sometimes feel that they're able to get their higher spending guests to come to the event. So you're looking at audience development by if the CEO, you have a great connection with the CEO and they get a table sponsorship. Now, what is it going to take for them to bring their VPs or their higher spending employees instead of, I'm going to invite my assistant because I haven't filled my table yet and I just want to make sure that I have a full table. So event expenses should definitely be, the sponsorship and sponsorship levels is what you should be planning to cover your event expenses. So what I would suggest is when you have a really good feel on your event, that you utilize ticket sales and sponsorship levels to cover these costs. And then everything that the auction brings in is going to be above and beyond what it takes to put on your event. And we were getting into a conversation about sponsorships, and people will say you can get someone to sponsor anything and everything, from technology to bid sheets to decor. And what's important is you want to make sure you're giving recognition to those sponsorships to cover your event expenses. Ticket sales also, what I would recommend about the expenses is that you start with, if it takes you $100,000 to put on your event, make sure your ticket sales are going to cover that $100,000. So that bidding is not mandatory to have a successful event. If people come and they're interested and that's an opportunity for you to share your message, they might not bid this year, but they would bid in the future. Again, you don't want to set your event up to be reliant upon auction revenue. And live and silent auction, they deserve their own section, so we will talk about auction math specifically with live and silent. So live and silent revenue, people are really curious about what the normal fundraising planning should be around this type of fundraising. 66% of income come from your live auction, and 34% comes from silent. So when you're looking to supplement, if you have a $200,000 goal and you've covered the first $100,000 with your sponsorships, then trying to figure out what you need to get in value for your auction will be used by these percentages. So how many items, and using rate of return, people ask me, how many items should I have? And I always push them to focus on value. You want to have the value because live auction, the normal market is 75% you're going to get in return for your live auction item, or for your live auction. And silent auction is going to give you 50%. So you want to make sure you're securing double your silent auction if you're planning to have, and I'll have an example here in a second. So $50,000 fundraising goal for auction specifically. So 66% of that is going to be $33,000. So your live auction revenue goal specifically is going to be that amount. And then with the silent auction, then you want to get 17%. That's what your fundraising goal is, to get $50,000 worth of auction. And again, it's all about fair market value. So when you're looking at the other percentages about your rate of return from a live auction, then you want to focus on the $57,750 worth of live auction value. So that's, again, that can be 10 items, and then you want to have about $6,000 items in your live auction. If you're younger, I suggest starting with lower amount when you have a really well-developed auction. The JDRF Guild had 40 items in their live. That's another whole discussion that we could talk about, the magic of how many live auction items you should have. That a lot of people are feeling that anything more than 30 is just excruciating, but there's different strategies on how you can space out your live auction item in your programming, and that's a whole nother topic. And silent auction, of course, if you want to get that $17,000 and you want to make sure you're getting $34,000 worth of value. And when we connect this back to data, as you're getting auction items in, it is so, so important to be assigning that value as they're coming in, because we'll talk about weekly reporting, talking to your committee development is really key, so that you can keep on track and keep the momentum up so that you know you're going to be on track. So that's the total value of $91,750, and if you had that, I would be very confident you're going to meet that $50,000 goal. And through development of your donors and your guests, you'll start to see that percentage going higher and higher, but on average market, the 75% and 50% is going to be very safe for predicting your revenue. So sustaining your auction now using data. Again, I always have to focus data on auction. Guest information. This is going to split into two different things. You have your attendees and your donors. That's what separates an auction from a normal cultivation event, because if we're just having a party, we're tracking attendees that are coming. That's everyone that's going to be in the room. Donors is a whole nother thing, because you could have, you'll have 200 more people that aren't actually attending your event, but you need to track their information as well. So I usually keep them two separate. We'll talk a little about software, but if you're using kind of old systems, and I will bring up Excel, some people will cringe at that, but if I'm using Excel to track this as a small nonprofit because I'm doing everything and I don't have money to buy a software, then I keep them in two separate sheets. You want to be tracking number of returning versus new donor or new attendees. That way, you want to have a nice percentage you want everyone to be returning, but you also have an opportunity to get them to get new people in front of your programming, hear your message. But just strictly, you're only as good as your data. So if you don't know who's new and who's not new, then you can't analyze it. Guest spending is really important, and we were talking about event-specific versus gifts over time. The batting average is what's important. Say one of your donors attends the event and does not give at that time. You want to be able to look at years past to see if they have been able to. And if you're getting into audience development, the other key thing is table spending, because you might have a really well-connected community member who attends your event, but they don't necessarily spend at the event. But if you are able to look at their table and see they invited 9 other people that spent $70,000 at your event, then they're still worth a lot to your community, even if you don't think they're not spending money. So you don't want to look just if that person is spending money at your event or not. Who are they inviting? And by looking at their table spending, then that's a way to get into that. So predicting progress, really everything is going to key off of that 70%, 75%, 50%. If you can look at your auction value every single week, then you'll have a good idea about what revenue you'll get. If you're 5 weeks out from auction and you haven't made that $50,000, then you can use the formula that I mentioned earlier to see what you would make, so you're clear going into auction what you're going to come out with. When the auction really should be your biggest thing, and the multi-sales and raffles are icing on the cake. You can't rely that someone's going to want to buy a raffle ticket, but if you keep it low price point, usually you can. The thing about Washington State, and you have to know your raffle laws, because if you don't have a license to make $5,000 or more, then you can get in trouble, and that has happened to me in the past. But in Washington State, you can plan to make $5,000 or less worth of revenue and not have a raffle license. There's another trick that if you can plan, and if you end up making more than that, with, you hadn't planned to make more than $5,000, but you end up, for whatever reason, in the heat of the moment, you got more, then you can apply for a license retroactively, so you feel safer in knowing that you're staying with Gambling Commission. Value versus quantity. This is something that I try to pay attention to when and I definitely make graphs. If you are, for your weekly goals on securing value, if you're slipping on that, you'll want to bump up your attention to quantity. So the weekly reporting is really important for your committee to keep the momentum and get them on track. And you're like, we need $10,000 to make this next week's goal to keep us on track. And if we're sliding down, then you might just focus on getting a whole bunch of restaurants in. And that's, restaurants are excellent auction item. They are the highest value rate of return. They're usually 100%, 90 to 100%. So if you're falling behind on your value, like I had mentioned, focus on the value, then you can try to push your committee to get more items, and it will that will help you to manage that whole process. The weekly goals is very important so that you can track where you are at. And this is one key thing in auction management is you want to reach those goals a month before your event. For anyone who has been involved in the auction production, there are bid sheets, display boards, catalog production. When I work on smaller auctions, sometimes we're getting items the night of, and if you are truly a small nonprofit, it's so hard to deal with that on the spot unless you're able to have someone that has, I frequently am hired to come event night just so I can handle those particular situations. But communicating with your committee a month ahead of time, that is what you want to shoot for, because you will be able to see the rest of the production through without pulling your hair out, which event people frequently are running around doing. Track category values, and I had mentioned that in the introduction. You want to have a really good balance of restaurants, wine, children's items, sports items, art. You don't want to have a whole bunch of your eggs in the sports basket, because then you have to rely that your auction audience are all going to buy sports items. Knowing your event is really key, though, because you can have, if it is a school auction, then of course the student projects are something that are going to sell the highest, because every single parent that is attending is going to bid on that special project, and that becomes a competition between Susie's parents and Billy's parents, because they have to take home that project. And so you can definitely, depending on who your audience is, have more weight in a particular category. But for everyone else that you're just trying to get your message to, those new donors the new attendees that maybe haven't been to your event before, you're trying to engage them, they'll want to have other items. And we can definitely, if you're interested in what items sell well, we can save that for the end, and I can share some stories on that. Communication and board engagement. With auctions, again, we were talking about volunteers. Volunteers are so critical for the success of your auction, because as one person tracking procurement, tracking sponsorships, and taking care of the production of the event, you need to empower the volunteers in your community to secure the rest. So again, the weekly updates, I cannot stress how important that is to keep momentum. The excitement that's around, customize your communications to highlight certain auction types each week. Let them know where they're at so that they can do a bigger push, because they are really, if they're on your board, they're committed to your cause, and they want to make sure that we're going to be successful. So giving them the proper communication is really key to keeping them involved. And then don't just plan for this year, plan for 3. Auctions take a long time to reach the full stride, and you should be focused on know what your baseline is, what do you need to do to keep on the lights, what's your actual, that's the one that you're more likely to share with your board, because you don't want to just squeak by the skin, by the skin of your teeth. Have an actual budget that is more than what you need to survive. And then set a stretch goal and challenge your community to achieve that, and most likely they can. And if you meet that stretch goal, then it's even more reason to celebrate at the end. So donor cultivation is what the biggest reason to have an auction. When I come from the guild, we only did the auction. That was the only thing we did all year. All of our development was focused on this one event, and we raised $53 million in the long run of that event. It's consistently over $3 million. All of the donor cultivation is focused on it. Every person's involvement is based on that event. For larger groups, now that I'm at Seattle University, the auction, the amount of time that it takes to put on an auction is questionable, because we have so many different ways to involve our community. So you really need to think about, auctions are a lot of work, we know that. It takes a lot of manpower, it's labor intensive, and you need to know that going in, but it's worth it because you get to have this unique experience with your donors. To stay on the data-driven part of the auctions, what do you need to best cultivate your donors? Basic guest information. You can't contact them unless you know who they are and where they're at. Spelling is so important. People will laugh that I comment on the spelling, but again, we're back to, if your data is not accurate, if I can't trust my data going into an event and my donors, they see their name spelled wrong, they aren't going to trust me that I'm tracking information. Someone that has been my supporter for 20 years, and they show up and their name is spelled wrong, then they're gonna let you know. And if anyone has experienced that, I've experienced that at every single nonprofit that I've worked at. Contact information and preferred method. Know how they want to be contacted. Email is so popular, is getting more and more popularity because there's a perceived that it's no cost. We should know that there is always cost involved with email. If it's resources, it's still a cost. But some people are really picky about, they don't want to have the extra paper, and that's been a big push to go paperless. However, there's so much information coming to you electronically. Hard copy invitation is still sometimes a better response, and you have to know your audience. Younger populations are going to be more responsive to email, and your older donors they want to have a nice hard copy invitation. Track their family connections. That's gonna let you know who their connections are. I laugh that if my donors aren't getting along, then I'm not gonna raise as much money. And a lot of our job is to be the steward for their relationships, not only my relationship with the donor, but our donors' relationships between each other. If we're putting together a dinner for 20 people, most likely the high spenders in your audience are going to get together because they want to have that experience together. They're going to buy at your event. And for whatever, I've just seen this happen where something, they're not getting along and they've consistently bought that item, and then one year that item falls flat because they're not talking about buying that together. So family connections, knowing that is going to be key for donor cultivation. Affiliations, of course, you want to know why they're involved, what other organizations they're involved in. I've heard a lot about this weekend, or this last couple days, talking about seeing where other people are giving. We'll have a better idea on what their capacity is for your event. Not only family connections, but I put other donors here because they have relationships between each other. Connection to your cause is key because that's why they're attending. They're going to be the ones that in the long run are going to come to your event over and over again. Past giving, like we were talking about the batting average, if they aren't giving in this particular year, but they have given thousands of dollars in the past, you want to make sure you're looking at that to see, get to know if they're dropping off and it's been a couple years, you want to maybe go to that person and see, why, and that is a relationship thing. Are they upset with you? Their capacity has changed? Just looking at the comparison over years is going to give you a clue on how to develop your relationships with your donors. Donor potential, those people who are in larger shops actually have prospect researchers. So it's nice to think of this idea of having a rating system for your donors. So that's another piece of data that you can collect. The small shops don't necessarily have that ability, but if you want anybody who has given over $1,000, you might tag them in a particular group, and just so you can watch, you're looking at ways to dissect your population. I was going to talk more about rating systems, but since this is a nonprofit focus, then we can leave that for Q&A at the end. And information changes. I like to keep track on if someone's moving around. You get more of an idea. If you're looking for insight, if someone owns their home or if they're renting, that's a big key to how much capacity they have. If they're moving residences, that just might be insight into that. And also, one thing that I love to talk about with why data is so important is because in the events field, turnover is so high. I see people a year, 2 years for event professionals. And so keeping track of this, and say something changes in your life, you would hope that you want to be at your organization for long term. But if you get married or something changes, you have to move back home to be with your family. Setting this up for the next person, that's the whole handoff of the baton. I am so committed to having clean, complete data that if for whatever reason I leave my organization, I know that that's going to be followed through, because then we avoid things like spelling mistakes from new staff are the ones who make those kind of mistakes. So there's data for donor cultivation and more. Not just basic guest information, but tracking activity. And we can talk about, if you have a calendar of events, you definitely want to see what events they're attending. If we're just staying in one event, you want to see, again, how many events they're coming to. We talk about the new versus returning. So tracking activity, attendance history, item donations, spending. And this is kind of repeat information, but it falls both into sustaining and the donor, because you can look at the data from an event perspective, or you can start breaking out into donors again if you have multiple events on your calendar. Are they doing sponsorships? Are they auction purchasers? How do we make auction purchasers into a sponsor? Do they even have that ability to do that? The auction versus live versus silent, you have only about 10% of your guests can really bid in your live auction. You end up seeing people sitting in the room that they're just having a good time at that point, depending on what level your fundraising is at. Again, at the larger auctions, I only have, for 40 items, I still only have about 30 people who are bidding on them, even in a room of 1,000, because they're just they're the ones that can afford that. The silent auction is a lower price point that you're going to have a lot more involvement, and the raffle tickets. So looking at your value for silent and making the multi-sale things even smaller, because you want to have an opportunity for those people that are new to participate. And donations, the difference between the auction spenders, they want something. There are goods and services in exchange for their donation. They are only able to write off what's above value. So then people who are more likely to give donations, again, they're just going to that's what you want. They're going to give you money no matter what, if they're going to get something or not. So paying attention to that group, they're going to be more connected. They're probably more likely to be on your committee. So just looking at the different things and how they want to be involved. And I have these 4 under spending because I want you to break them down. I want you to actually have sponsorship in your RAP report. I want you to have a separate section for auctions in your RAP report, and donations, and then other. And then look at the donor in particular with all 4 of them. So you want to look at them individually and then look at the donor spending and break it down, and that's going to help you to get to know your donor more. And then solicitations is another key thing that some people sometimes forget. When you are going through the auction process, you want to know who can make the strongest ask. And if you don't know who made if you're only tracking the donor who actually gave the item, you're missing the key link to who can make that ask for the future. I end up making a whole nother section for staff ask, because those are people I can send a letter to and they're going to give every single year, but there are a lot more higher valued items like dinners in people's homes, experiences, Julie's at, the party at Julie's Boathouse. Sometimes you want to do hot shop parties, restaurant connections. If there's a difference between contacting a restaurant and asking for a $50 gift certificate, or having someone that knows the owner that can ask for a chef's dinner for 12, or maybe even one step further, that chef, who's pretty well known in Seattle, will come to your house and cater your dinner. And then knowing who has the connections with the wine experts in the city, or your city, in Seattle or your city. Because then you have this person who has the chef connection, and you have this person who has a wine connection, and you start getting these amazing ideas for your live auction, but you have to know who can make that ask, because those specialty type items require a connection that sometimes as a staff member you might not have. So as I mentioned, this is my version of the donor cultivation, particularly with auctions. We have seen this over and over and over again, and I just wanted to try to paint a picture of how people can participate. And again, auctions are ways for any level of their capacity, no matter what their capacity, they can be involved in your event. And again, volunteering is at the bottom, but as I mentioned at the beginning, that volunteering is sometimes the key predictor for major gifts. If they're not at capacity to do it now, they might think about in their future that legacy gifts. But that's the easiest way to be involved in your event. So volunteering, auction donors. Most auction donors don't actually attend your event, so it's very removed from the event setting, and ticket sales. So I put that at the bottom because that's the very beginning point to get involved in your auction. Then, raffle purchases, silent auction, raise the paddle. I do have raise the paddle on there twice. That is on purpose. Again, the strategy is to start at $100,000. That might be too high for your event, but just for example, then you start going down the list down to $25. So someone can participate in the raise the paddle section even if they can't give at the really high level. Sponsorships and corporate partners, and live auction participation, again, raise the paddle, which sometimes is much higher than the $25 or $100 level. And then title sponsors and matching gifts. If you are able to look at your data really clearly, you get the sense on why they're giving. Some people will give you a lot of money and they don't necessarily want the recognition. Auctions are a lot about recognition. People who are bidding at the event, they are doing it frequently because they want to show their peers that I'm able to raise my paddle at $100,000, and people like to do that. They will save their gift until that moment. But being able to get a matching gift could be key to making that $100 level that much more powerful, because I have secured my matching gift. Everybody in this room that's going to give at $100 is going to be matched. Maybe you're able to give at $75, but because you know it's going to get $200 for your event, that they might be more likely to give just even $25 more. And I like to say that auctions and auction planning is all about surgically removing every last penny from the wallet before you leave, which just, like I said, having all of these different ways to be involved and different price points is going to help you to get all of that. So tracking data, communication, and follow-up. again, not only are you tracking their basic information, but you want to track the emails, how you're communicating with them, what the communication has been. Again, it helps in the handoff. Say, if you're not, you shouldn't. I hope you're not the only one working on this event, and if you are, then we frequently say, in case I get saved or in case I get hit by a bus. I'm saying that to my team all the time because sometimes I'm feeling like I'm the only one that has that information in my head, and by turning the communication into a type of data that can be, I mean, people are still using hard files. I mean, I hate to say this, but print off the email and put it in their donor file. When my life is getting crazy, I end up defaulting to some paper systems, which is embarrassing to say, but it does help. So then if a new ED comes in, then they're able to actually get to know the donor, and that's key to, you're committed to, we're in nonprofits. We love the work that we're doing. We're committed to having a successful office, but again, there's life situations that end up taking you away from that position. And thank you. Thank every single person that has been involved. Volunteers, the auction donors, the ticket sales, and customize those thank yous. Of course, a lot of those thank yous are required because you have to issue tax documentation, but don't just send them an invoice. Write a really nice cover letter, but your audience cannot be thanked enough. Nobody can be thanked enough. Appreciation is something that is really important to keeping your donors at your event and being involved for many, many years. So methods, donor management software, there are quite a few. Like I mentioned, I am the event professional, not necessarily the data professional. There has been a lot of presentations this last couple days on choosing the right donor management software for you. That's going to help. Having a donor management software is going to be best for you so that you're not doing paper files. One key thing is hire an intern. If you're not feeling like you're able to actually file your emails and keep them together, a really good strategy for small nonprofits is to have one email that you're sending everything to, and having a particular person then input those emails into your donor management system. And I frequently hire unpaid interns. You want to make sure you're taking care of them. It's great job experience. I have gotten interns from University of Washington, Seattle University. The universities are very great places. Sometimes high school students even want to be part of that. So if you don't have a large budget, then just think about that as a way to help you in managing your information. And then auction software, of course, there are many different out there. I have high experience in Auction Tracker and Auction Pay, now known as Greater Giving. That is my particular favorite. I know that Razor's Edge has the Auction Maestro Pro. I don't have a lot of experience in that, but there's Maestro Soft. And then some people will cringe when I say Excel, but it is possible. When you're having a smaller, I tracked a lot of my procurement I was securing $800,000 worth of auction items, and I did use Excel for a lot of that tracking. And you need to have a lot of time. I would give 11 months it takes to plan a successful auction. And if you end up being in a situation like I have been frequently, where 5 months from now we're about to have a major auction and our revenue goal is $200,000, then sometimes you come into a situation that doesn't have an auction management, you don't have a donor management. How are you going to do it? Excel does work by tracking all the different points that I talked about earlier. You'll have all the information that you need to be successful through the rest of the event. People still do paper system auctions. It's crazy, and again, it's labor intensive. By getting an auction software, you will be able to, the guest experience is enhanced so much. We talk about express pay. If we have this data entry and invoicing on the spot, it's so much better for the guest experience. And so just think about that. I think it's worth the investment to have your event day go really well from entry to exit for your guests, and they have a fun time. Like I said, they're fired up, they're ready to participate, and a month later you're going to have your kickoff meeting for your next event. So Excel is possible. It's not preferred, and it is even when I enter into some nonprofit situations where we're using Excel. But it definitely, mail merging is your friend when in that situation, but look into some of the auction softwares that I mentioned because it will make your life a lot easier. So hopefully I didn't get too off topic, but I'm definitely available for questions about my auction experience. We can, if there's anything that anyone would like to ask.
My problem I often have is that I don't get all of the donor or my auction guest information. They're just invited by board members, they're invited by table captains, and I get frustrated because I'd like to. I wish I had. Do you have advice for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in case you couldn't hear him, he was mentioning that it's difficult to get that guest information because they're invited by a friend. So that is, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because what I will do as part of the registration process is to either confirm or give information on the spot. So I will every auction that I work, I try to make sure we're doing some sort of express pay where we swipe the card at registration. There's usually, you have to have a signature involved with that anyways, but the excellent thing about express pay is that they swipe their card at the beginning of the evening. They don't have to come to check out at the end of the night. They're already taking care of their purchases, and then leaving the event, they just need to pick up their items and go. So the reason why I mentioned that is a great opportunity. I actually do mail merge for this, even though I use auction software, is I make a half sheet of paper that has their name, their phone number, their email, and their address. And I prepare that on Friday night before I go into my event, and I staple that to the bid sheet. And as part of picking up your packet, you train your volunteers to be like, thank you so much for coming, and it looks like, if there's information. I actually will take the time and highlight the stuff that I'm missing. And then your volunteer will be in front of the donor, and that's where you want to ask. Confirm, can you please confirm that this address is correct? Maybe just make sure that all this contact information, or if there's no information, then the highlight, it's visual, it's easier for the volunteer. Say, oh, it looks like we're missing your phone number. Would you mind providing that? And then you keep that. That's a way to see who's checked in. You have, then I do put the signature, that's the signature page for my express pay. So, because you want to have documentation that they've signed up for that. Very rarely, it's so common now that people are very comfortable giving their credit card at registration, but you want to make sure you're having their sign off like, I have agreed to do this, and that's a method that I have used to collect guest information. Sometimes they don't want to give it to you, even if they're a friend, if they're coming because they're a friend, and they're just, someone's like, oh, I'm involved in this auction committee and I need to fill my table, could you please just come? And so they're like, oh, okay, I'll come, and but they're not necessarily at registration. They might not, they're like, I'm not planning on coming. They already know they're not planning. So then through programming and the message of your event, by the end of the night, they might feel differently. But anyways, I'm going beyond what is the results of that registration process. But that's what I have done at almost every single auction, to confirm or to collect information.
Because people have come in the past and they've spent like thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have anything. I can't get back in touch with them. And it's really frustrating.
How often does that happen when you don't know who invited them?
I can tie it back to who invited them, but then I have to ask them.
Yeah. I mean, doing that initial for every single guest, confirm or provide information, it's usually pretty easy. I only have a couple people that are like, and they'll give their email and then they'll leave the rest blank. or they'll just say no. And most likely the people that are saying no are probably aren't going to spend anything anyways. If they didn't give their credit card at the beginning of the night and they end up making purchases because they're having such a great time and they want the blinky ring that you get for buying a raffle ticket, and then they have to come back and pay you at the end of the night. And then that's that second opportunity to ask for information. So train your volunteers well to be looking if you're missing or not, if you're missing information. And you had your hand up back there.
Have you ever had incentives for the tables that spend the most? You know, the table that spends the most will get this nice bottle of wine or what have you, assuming you're able to enter in all the data as the events go.
Right. The question was if I've ever had an opportunity to do incentives for table spending. I haven't done it in a public fashion, like advertising on the website, but I have done that in committee, in like the context of your board and your committee. One really good cultivation for your cultivation event, I mean, and that's the other thing, you can have events for your events, is having a sponsorship appreciation. And at that point is when I start pulling data like the table spending, and when you're recognizing your sponsors at that event, and like I said, take every opportunity to thank them. Come up with those key pieces of data that are like, and the Boeing table spent the most, and like give them a bottle of wine. And so it's not something that was officially advertised, but it's something that you do after the fact, and then they get extra recognition in front of their peers. And then if you develop that, then it's something that the people who are your core group of people will know that there's recognition for that type of thing, and they'll be more inspired to focus on audience development. So I have, like I said, I have not done that in a public manner, but have definitely done it as wrap-ups. The other thing is if you have a really high-powered board, and your guests know that, the board reviews all the spending. And so I have, after events that have existed for 15 or 20 years, their guests that attend that event, they know who's looking at the spending. And depending on your constituency, there's some people who are involved in fundraisers because they consider that it's part, it's like mandatory. And then there's other scenarios that it's if you want to. And there are board members that will base business decisions on who supports their nonprofits, and people will actually work into their deals that, you know, okay, we're gonna make this deal and we're gonna sign this contract, but as part of the contract, I want you to give $10,000 in sponsorship to my event. So that's about knowing who your sponsors are and your board cultivation, and that is a really high developed board and committee, but so those are just their passive ways of recognition, but they will learn after time. People will learn what they're being recognized for. So you had a question?
Do you have any advice on how to encourage our donors and educate them on the importance of turning or submitting their auction items or donations a month prior?
Mm-hmm.
At our event, we tend to have
Last
a
minute.
date, but that never is honored by our donors. And of course, we're not going to not accept an auction item, but we'll literally get day of.
Right.
And I don't think that they quite know what the process is of, we have to process it, we have to make a name card and all that stuff, and that's really hard, especially even just the week before.
Absolutely. So her question was asking for strategies on how to get your donors to submit their paperwork a month ahead of time. And even that happens. No matter what size your event is, how mature it is, that happens. The strategies that I use around that is the procurement form, or acquisitions form, or is another term people use. Don't publish the deadline. Say, turn it in now. And I end up putting the deadline at the bottom of my form, and then I use language like donations are published weekly. So that's another thing that will require work on your part, but if you can commit to doing that, donation and the weekly communications that we talked about in your committee, donations are published weekly, turn your form in now, and then that's another, it's not an it's not, they get recognition and they get highlighted, and so that's back to the thanking And that's, so far, that has been the biggest change that I have made in forms and communications is don't publish the deadline. Have it have it included, but don't have that as the deadline is, because then people think I have until the 20th to turn in my form. No, not I have until the 20th. I need to have it in next week. So, and the other thing I tell my committee is when I sit down with them and meet, it's like pick a day. Put a reminder on your calendar right now. Every single week, I want you to pick a time and a day to email me and tell me what you're working on. And then it also, that does help to alleviate some of the work that you have to do in following up. It does not replace the work you have to do in following up, but it does if you're able to develop the people that are helping you. That's another thing that has been really helpful. So, looks like we're out of time.
I just want to give everybody a couple minutes to, if they have to do anything before that final.
Yeah.
Email.
So.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time, and I'm glad to see you here. And hopefully you have hopefully you had a great experience, and we'll see you at the next session.